Everybody, welcome back to the channel. So let's continue from where we left off in the previous video. Now what we are doing is we are learning CSS grid, okay? And the way we are learning it is from the FreeCodeCamp curriculum, and we are building this magazine project that you can see here. Okay, so far we've looked at steps 1 all the way to 20. In this video, hopefully we're going to look at step 21 to 40. So let's get started with step 21. Now, within your aside elements, which we have here, we want to create 2 image elements, a block quote element and a third image element. So first, what I'm going to do is to create 2 image elements, like so. And then I'm going to create a block quote. So this is going to be a block quote element. And then the next thing I'm going to create is also create a third image element, like so. Now we want to give the block quote element a class of image quote. So let's give it a class. The value of the class is going to be image dash quote, like so. And then we can move on to the next one. Now for 22, within the image wrapper element, which we have here, we want to give your first image element a source attribute of this right here. So I'm just going to copy it, and then let's give our image a source attribute, like so. We also want to give it an alt attribute. Okay, so the value of the alt is going to be image of the quote machine project. I hope I got that right. Then want to give it a class. So say, you know what, let me do this, bring this down here. Then I'll say class. The value of the class is going to be image dash 1. Okay. We also want to give it a loading attribute. The value of the loading attribute is going to be lazy. And then we also give it a width with an attribute with a value of 600. And then a height with an attribute, with a value of 400. Okay. All right, so there we have our image quote machine nicely placed in our project. Okay, so for the second image, we are going to give it the following values. So the source will have a value of this URL here. I'll just copy it, and then we can paste it like so. Okay. As you can see, this is our calculator image. So next up, we want to add an alt. The alt will have a value of image of a calculator project. Then we also want to give it a loading attribute with a value of lazy. Let's give it also a class. Let's set the class to image dash 2. And then we also want to give it a width. The value of the width is going to be 400. And the value of the height is going to be also 400. Okay. Now let's move on. Next up, what we want to look at for step 24 is that the third image. Okay, so the third image will have a source attribute with the value of this URL here. Again, I'll copy it and just paste it. Let's give it an alt. As you can see, this is our third image, very giant. So we're going to work on it. But first, let's give it an alt with an attribute of 4 people working on code. Then the loading attribute will also have a value of lazy. The class attribute will have a value of image-3, and then we give it a width attribute with a value of 600, and then a height attribute with a value of 400, like so. Okay, now let's come to work on the image quote element. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to nest an HR, and the HR is a self-closing tag, so that's how we're going to write it. And as you can see, there's the HR. The HR is an horizontal line, as you can see on the screen, between the two images. Then after the HR, we also want to add a P tag. Okay, and then let's give the P tag a class set to quote. Then want to give it a text, so I'm just going to copy the text. The millions of people who are learning to code through FreeCodeCamp will have an even better resource to help them learn these fundamentals. Okay, wait, so within the image quote element, nest an HR element, which we've done, a P element, which we've done, and a second HR element. Okay, so I'm just going to copy this and paste it below the P element. Okay, now we can continue. Okay, so now let's get started with the CSS side of things. Okay, so as you can see, we have our quote here with an HR, a horizontal line on top of it and one below it. Let's get started with the HR, with the CSS, sorry. So for the CSS, what we want to do is we want to start by targeting the star selector. So what the star selector does is that it selects everything on our page. It selects every HTML element. Okay, now we also want to include the before and after pseudo elements. Okay, so these are pseudo selectors that allows you to create an element within your style sheet. So you want to create an element, you can create it with the before and after pseudo selected without having to create it here in your HTML. Okay, so let's also add the after pseudo selector, after, like so. Then what we want to do is, as you can see, we want to remove all the margin and padding. So let's set padding to 0. Let's also set margin to 0 as well. We are going to add our own padding and margin to the various elements. But for now, what we are doing is we are removing all the default padding and margin. Okay, so we set the padding and margin properties to 0, and we also set the box sizing property to border box, like so. Okay, next up, for step 27, we want to create an HTML selector. Okay, let's give it a font size property. The value of the font size property is going to be 62.5%. Okay, this will set the default font size property for your web page to 10 pixels. Okay, so the default font size for the browser is 16 pixels. So by setting it to 62.5%, the default is now 10 pixels. Okay, so what this means is that when you are using units like rem, which is relative to the root or relative to the default, it is easier because the default is now 10 pixels. So when you say 2 rem, for example, it will be 20 pixels. When you say 3 rem, it will be 30 pixels. 4 rem will be 40 pixels, in that manner. Okay. Okay, so for 28, we want to create a body selector, and then we want to give it a font family property. The value is going to be Baskerville. You know what? I'm just going to copy it and then paste it here like so. Okay, so as you can see, our font has now changed. Then what we are going to do is we add a fallback font, which in our case is serif, so that if a particular browser does not have the Bakerville font, it will use serif instead. Okay, now let's set the color property to linen. Okay, and then let's also set the background color property to this RGB value we have here. So I'm just going to copy it like so and paste it. Okay, so now we're making progress. So let's continue. Oops, something is wrong. Your body selector should have a font family property set to Baskerville with a fallback serif, which we've done. Okay. Yeah, so I forgot to bring the comma. You should add a comma between the fonts that you are using. Okay, now let's create an H1 selector, and then this is our H1. So what we want to do is we want to give it a font family of Anton, which is also one of the fonts that we took from Google Fonts. So as you can see, we now have a new font for our H1. Again, we are also going to give it a fallback font of sans serif. All right. Finally, in this video, for step 30, we want to create an H2, H3, H4, H5, H6 element. Let's separate it with commas. So what this will do is it will select all the H elements from H2 to H6 that we have in our page, and then it will give it a font family. Let's set that property to Railway, which is also one of the fonts that we got from Google Fonts. Again, let's give it a fallback font of sans serif. All right, so yeah, so that's it. So we are going to end this particular video here, and then in the next video we'll continue and look at steps 31 all the way to 40. All right, so see you in the next one.